Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm thrilled to have back Paula Scatolini. Paula, welcome back.
Thank you, Guy. It's great to be here. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
I appreciate that. So Paula is a writer, educator, and thought leader in somatics, movement, and embodied consciousness. As a mentor, guide, and facilitator of experiential and transformative processes, Paula brings over 30 years of training in human behavior that she interweaves with her experience in the nervous system, therapeutic use of sound, movement, and bioenergetic principles to support individuals in aligning the psyche, soma, and heart. She's worked in the field of embodiment since 1997. She co-founded and is an online faculty member of the Embodied Recovery Institute. She's also provided leadership at institutions such as Duke University. Her somatically oriented lens is featured in the book, Trauma-Informed Approaches to Eating Disorders. Paula, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So, before we get going here, remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Southern California and spent 13 years in Hawaii, and then took a one-way flight to the East Coast and have been in Durham, North Carolina for a long time, since 2026.
Wow. So, all right. So when we got in touch, you had said there's some new things you were doing, but let's talk to us about that transition. What were you doing and what did you transition into? And then we'll
Sure. Yeah, I love catching up because I think I'm one of those people that COVID created an opportunity, right, for something different. And so at the time, prior to COVID, I was a somatic experiencing practitioner, right? I was studying sensory motor psychotherapy at the time. I was studying Kathy Kane's work using touch therapeutically for developmental trauma. And all of a sudden, I could not touch people, right? I could not use a lot of my somatic skills. And so I did a quick pivot to online work, like most of us. And I had already been using acoustic therapy at that time for several years, but did not understand the potency of it at that time. I was doing it in person. So it wasn't until I moved online that I began to study it and the phenomenology of it more closely. And so COVID was a gift in that way. And it opened up the door to understanding how sound can be used therapeutically, and continue to utilize my SE skills and my other skills. But it just opened up a whole new world for me.
Wow.
And so I've been on a journey since then.
That sounds really interesting. Before we get into that, and I'm really excited to get into that because I don't think I've talked about that on this podcast.
You have not. I looked. Yes.
But let me ask, because it's really exciting to me to hear that you used COVID as an opportunity.
Yes.
How did that come about for you? How did those thoughts come about for you? And yeah.
Well, I think it became an opportunity. And I did actually speak about it on a public broadcast of how did we do the things that we're trained to do, especially somatics, online, right? So I was already having to think creatively about that, right? And how people, what props, what things can they use in their home to facilitate the same experiences as I was providing through touch. And so I ended up speaking about that because in somatics, we can use props and somatic tools to give the body an experience that's similar to human contact.
Such as?
that's what weighted blankets, weighted pillows, warm rice packs on your kidneys, right? We can work with the body through different mechanisms and facilitate the same processes. So I started to get very curious that way through the somatics. But then the sound, when I brought the sound in and coupled it with the somatics, I was getting the same effects and even better. So then I got very curious. So it sort of blossomed from there.
So what is, and I want you to kind of talk briefly about acoustics and acoustic therapy and treatment, but then I want to ask you how you got into that.
Oh, okay. So sound healing is a broad term, right? And when you think of sound healing, you think of singing bowls, right?
Right.
That's
exactly.
the thing. Everybody's going to sound baths, right? Which has, it has some therapeutic effects. But I think then there's subsets, right? And so acoustics is a subset, right? And so people that study more of the brain neurology, and they study how acoustics, how theta waves work, how beta waves work, how sound waves work, right? So that was my doorway into acoustics and thinking about, sound apps, right? And frequencies and how do frequencies impact the brain, right? So I knew it from that angle, but I had been introduced to it through Dr. Porges from his development of this tool, which stimulates the vagus nerve via acoustics. So my doorway into sound was that way. So we can think of it from the brain science of sound healing, the theta waves and beta waves and meditation. We can think of it through Porges' mechanism, which is going to be acoustics and frequencies, because that's what his program has designed. But then I also went and got trained in tuning forks, which is a whole nother subset of sound healing, which works with resonance. Right. And in trauma therapy, we understand what resonance is, and this idea of entrainment, and how do we entrain the systems of our physiology into more coherent tones.
What does that mean?
Entrainment. Yeah. This is the vocabulary of sound. Entrainment is, you can look up Dan Siegel's work. He uses it a little differently, but this idea of, when a child is upset and crying, the parent, with their own processes, their own physiology that's co-regulated, will entrain the child out of dysregulation into regulation via the parent's somatic resonance, right? So we're using entrainment in interpersonal neurobiology when we think about co-regulation, right? I use it a little bit differently because I'm thinking about how this sound can entrain your system into a parasympathetic state, right? Out of sympathetic into parasympathetic. So it just means bringing along to create more harmony or coherence.
The first thing that came to my mind when you started talking about sound healing and then acoustics was music, of course.
Yes.
I mean, of course, music can often be healing for a lot of us. But so how do we want to talk about this? Because this is really interesting to me. Where are we going to go from here?
Well, for me, the most exciting piece is to share about Porges' program and then the potential possibilities that can happen with it. Because I do think we're on the verge of some of the next possibilities after somatics for trauma healing, right? We have psychedelics, and this is sort of parallel to psychedelics right now. I think psychedelic assisted therapy, where we're going to see kind of sound sneak up on the side. And so that's why I'm bringing it to folks' attention to start paying attention to this, because it's going to, become more and more available and discussed.
Okay. So let's back into that. What is Porges doing? I mean, I think a lot of people associate the polyvagal theory with him and so forth.
Yes. So in 2017, I was given his program by another SEP that he had developed. The initial studies and research were on kids with autism. So it was developed for children with autism to help shift physiological state and attend to some of their symptomology, right? So he had a whole program and research. But the trauma therapist community got a hold of this program. It's called the Safe and Sound Protocol, but I call it a program process, which essentially it uses music that has been set to specific frequencies that elicit safety in the nervous system. And it's fed through the auditory pathway, through acoustics. So you're listening to music. And it's a vagal nerve stimulator. So it's going to innervate your vagal nerve, bringing the safety into the auditory pathway and entrain or begin to bring the nervous system out of defense into social engagement.
Wow.
So pretty fun and powerful, and also not always a smooth ride, right? Because you can think about nervous system, especially those of us that are older, have built a lot of traction, of constriction and defense, right? So, you have to train people in how to use it and consider the nervous system that's sitting across from them. But there's lots of support happening from the company that provides this program. But that's kind of the gist of it, is using sound and acoustics and the frequency of safety that you can think about as it's the frequency that would be similar to a mother's lullaby, if we think about hertz and what's been captured in that. And that is fed to you over the course of 5 hours.
So, excuse me. So is this a particular type of music? I'm thinking like meditation music or spa-like music.
Exactly. It's more of I would think of it as an algorithm that has been set to a series. They're playlists, and there's 5 hours worth of playlists. And trauma therapists will use this, will break it down into half an hour segments. Right. So you would listen to a half an hour of a playlist with me, and you'll be getting, I think of it as medication, this frequency of safety for half an hour. And then you'll have a week to integrate. And then you'll get the frequency of safety for half an hour. And then you have a week to integrate. Now, a lot happens in that half an hour. And this is where we get to the psychedelic piece of it, because as more safety comes into your system, your defenses soften and subconscious material starts to rise to the top.
So this isn't just listening to music.
No.
This is, as you said, very similar to psychedelic assisted therapy, where there is a setting, so forth. There's a guide there or a mentor there.
Well, that's how I'm using it. So I do have to put that caveat, because this is being used by occupational therapists. It's being used by maybe coaches, I'm not sure. But there's a range of people using for different reasons. And they're all getting different results and equally good results. But I am using it in the same way as psychedelics. And that excites me, right? Because then that's what we want to get out to the trauma therapist, right? Because not everybody wants to use psychedelics, right? We want a range of options, right? They might want to have choices. At some point, I think people might be asking to combine these, that's potentially, what we're going to see down the line. I think there's a brand new world that's opening. And so we just want to make sure that sound is, part of that.
Can you give us an example, perhaps, of a case study you worked with and what it looked like?
Sure. So I have many. So traditionally, let me go back to the beginning. My caseload was primarily working with 17, 18, 19-year-olds that were stuck at home during COVID, miserable, right? Because they're supposed to be launching, right? So lots of anxiety, lots of trouble eating, lots of digestive troubles. And so we were going through this program, and they were feeling better. They were feeling more regulated. They were able to eat. They were feeling more embodied. Their anxiety was going down. So I knew from that population that, symptomatically, I was seeing pretty prevalent changes happening. And then I have applied it with quite severe symptomatologies of clients that have more developmental trauma, where there's more fragmentation, and seeing more cohesion occur in the self and more resolution of split off parts. So I've gone that extreme. Now, more recently, my clients are therapists. So they're coming for a deep dive into their attachment system. They're coming to explore their platforms for their capacity to feel safe, feel seen, feel heard, express their emotions, express who they are authentically in the world, right? And to reconnect to their inner wisdom, right? Their access to their intuition, their access to knowing their path in life and what's next, right? So that clarity that comes from clear interoception. So there's a range of people that I've used this with. So current client steeped in somatic experiencing, NARM, so really done their own work, but can't get to the core issue. The core issue happened in the womb. So the way I facilitate this is I set it up similar to a psychedelic process where we'll put pillows around, we'll get cozy, we'll put a blanket, and we'll elicit. And I work with different ways of thinking, holding, experiencing, to consider what the ideal space would be like for you to feel safe. And how would you like that structured, right? How would you like that to be? Then the sound comes in. So I'm coupling the sound with these somatic tools. And as the system softens, the material from the womb experience begins to emerge.
Okay, let me pause you for a second. So are you yourself also listening to the music?
I am not.
Headphones?
They have headphones on.
Okay.
And I'm sitting across from them.
Okay.
And my role, similar to the guide, is to be as in my own present moment embodiment as much as possible. Almost like I'm sitting next to an infant in a crib, watching them sleep. That's the level of presence, right? And where my consciousness needs to be. Okay. I think that helps to facilitate, right, a more expansive experience for the person, right? Because my embodied presence, they can feel that somatically, right? So they've got that, then they've got the sound, then they have the memory that starts to come up, right? Where they feel, I know I am not small, but I feel small right now. Right. And we know how somatic therapy works, right? So the consciousness starts to go in that direction. My clients have some witness capacity, so they know where they are and they know how to navigate it. And if they don't, they can open their eyes and find me. And then we can pause the music, which you can't do in psychedelic assisted. Can't pause, right? But we can pause and we can regulate and we can elicit that present moment. I call it memory time dynamic that you need to navigate in trauma therapy.
All right, let me just pause here. This is real. My mind is lit right now. Hang on, but I just want to pause to thank our sponsors for 2 seconds here. Okay, so that is a very interesting and I think key point is that you can pause. So I'm coming to you. I want to do this. Now, as I'm listening to this, is it music or is it sound?
It's music. It's vocal music, pop music, or children's music, or the latest I've been using is the classical playlist. Just classical music, no vocals.
Okay. So, and obviously, I think it's important to point out here, there's the intention also, right?
Yes.
So I'm coming in here with a specific intention, not just to relax.
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, but now when I'm doing this and I begin to do this and I start to feel something or experience something or remember something, am I instructed to do what?
Yes. So before we start listening, I'm going to do some coaching. The primary premise is that what you experience are your memories, whether they're somatic, whether they're emotional, whether they're visual, right? Because they're going to come through all those channels. Mm-hmm. So if your heart starts racing, I say, okay, well, that's a memory, right? Or you're in the sympathetic pattern, right? If that's what it's listening. So can you feel that as such, right? And can you feel me here with you? Because we know that trauma is not about always what happened. It's about not having the safe other to be with you while you feel what happened, right? So as long as they can feel me there with them and know I'm there and be with their internal experience and be curious about it, it will continue, it will process. We don't have to always intervene. We can just let it go. Right?
Well, so are you instructing or coaching your clients to open their eyes when they feel something, or what are you coaching them to do?
It's up to the client. It depends on their capacity, right? So somatic, again, my clients right now are therapists like yourself, right? So they may have the capacity and actually enjoy studying themselves. So they're not going to want to always open their eyes because they're fascinated with the process, right? Mm-hmm. But if it was someone who wasn't my client and they experienced sensations that they were like, what is this? Something feels odd. They could open my eyes and we could make contact so they could feel my presence. And then I might put up and say, okay, well, put your thumb up if everything's okay, and put it to the side if you're kind of concerned. So we have some way of communicating. I also titrate. We'll listen for 10 minutes, then check in, listen for 10 minutes, and then check in. So there is never any, what I feel is over medicating during it. So there's lots of titration built in. And some therapists titrate even more than I do. They'll listen to 2 minutes of the song, right? So for me, it is an in-depth study of the physiological structures of your attachment and bonding system, right? As it's being brought out of defense and strategies, and you're coming back into more secure attachment is what we're studying.
So, and why are you studying that specifically?
Why? Because the program is influencing the social engagement system, which for me is the neurological structures of the attachment system, right? So it's influencing how your social engagement system neurocepts safety. So it's influencing, am I safe enough? Do I feel safe enough in the world? Do I feel safe enough expressing my feelings? Do I feel safe enough being me? Do I feel safe enough? I mean, who of us has all that, right? On board. Right?
Right. Oh my gosh. This is so intense.
It is.
Paula. Wow. So this is so interesting that I've been doing this podcast for so long, and this is the first time really that I've talked about this on here. So do people come to, and I think really, again, the fact that this is somewhat reminiscent of psychedelic assisted therapy, yet to me, it feels like there's a lower barrier to entry, right? I mean, you can pause. You can,
Yes.
obviously
Yes.
people are doing low doses of psychedelic assisted therapy and larger doses, of course. But how does this differ aside from those characteristics?
Yeah. I mean, I'm toying as well as thinking of it more in line with holotropic breath work, perhaps, right? So I think that it's for me, what I'm witnessing is it does allow the neural pathway that allows us to find safe connection, be it with others, be it with the universe, be it with ourselves, right? So that's very similar, right, to psychedelic assisted therapy. It can elicit uncomfortable memories in a similar way, but we can titrate it. We can, how else is it different? I don't have a lot of training in the psychedelics to refer to that. Beyond the titration piece, I mean, I can't speak to exactly what's happening in the brain, right? To compare them, but I think that if we're talking about states of consciousness and shifting states of consciousness and expanding consciousness, they're both doing that or allowing that process to occur. And it could be safe to say that this is also, eliciting a capacity for, access to oxytocin and some of those chemicals it's our bonding hormones, right?
Right. I know one thing with psychedelics is that there are different types that people use to elicit different states of consciousness. For example, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, etc. With acoustic therapy, are there different tools or elements that you would use to treat specific symptoms, or?
No, I think of it as if we just come down to nervous system health, right? The health of the nervous system. And when we have a healthy nervous system, we have resiliency. We have capacity for resiliency. We have capacity for restoration. We have capacity for self-regulation. We have capacity for co-regulation. We have capacity for clearer interoception and cues about what we want and what we need. And so I don't think it's this symptom or that symptom. I think it's more of, it could be more thought of like dosage. If we take the same medicine and we think about a particular system might need a different dose of that medicine in a different way, but it's all going to feed into a healthy, resilient nervous system, right? Which is going to have health effects in all different areas.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that you're working with therapists. How does your protocol work? For example, are you working in several sessions, or in the course of, what does it look like?
So I've moved to doing most of my work in groups. And part of that is to facilitate a shared experience of our humanness, right? And to start to connect people to each other through, nobody is without trauma at some level, right? Or stress response at some level. So to level the playing field, we do it in groups. We meet for 12 weeks. And so we have a 3-month experience together.
Wow.
And that's 1.5 hours, 2 hours.
And it's online?
It's online. So I have people all over the world.
Wow.
Right. So I can have people in Dubai, I can have people in Europe, meeting people who they never would have met. Right. And then sharing their similar experiences of being human, right? Of their attachment dynamics, of their ways of holding back who they are, of their realizations of what's important to them. Many people, after they do my group, they go change their lives. They're like, oh, I'm not happy here. That needs to change. Or maybe it happens during the 3 months, but by the end, there's a lot of clarity about who they are.
This sounds incredible. As soon as you said the group process, I thought to myself, wow, that sounds intense. But at the same time, like you said, you're with other people who are in this process, not unlike a normal group experience, but sharing it sounds very intimate also.
Yes. Yes. Very intimate. A lot of the time the groups want to continue to meet even after. And so some of them I've continued.
So is this once a week, and for how long?
It's a 3-month group, once a week for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on the size of the group. They were about 4 people per group, and now they're going to be about 6. So it'll be about 2 hours, but they're intimate. They're small groups. So you really get to know the people in the group. And there's a strong container of safety that's developed just from the beginning, and I work on it in each group. So there's a sense of this is a place I can come and be myself and kind of unload the truth, right?
Unloading the truth.
Yeah.
So, okay, as we kind of wind down here, who is this group for?
So my groups are primarily for therapists or those who have been in embodiment practices. So there's some level of understanding about the nervous system, some ability to have witness consciousness. Because that, if they don't have that, then they kind of need a pre-class on somatic tracking and witness consciousness. And so my groups tend to have folks who have done some yoga or done some breath work or done some somatic therapy already, right? So they're kind of along. They've come along.
And define witness consciousness for those who
don't. Another word for it is dual perception, where we can hold our awareness of our internal state and the outer environment at the same time. So Guy, I can still feel you here, and I can notice my heart beating fast, right? And I can do that at the same time. Or I can see or sense a memory of my childhood, and I know I'm sitting in this chair, right? Because if I can't do that, then I do need some coaching and skills on how to do that first, because this is can certainly whip up some memories, right? So we want to know that people have that capacity.
Now, just quickly, this is whipping up memories because it's in that specific frequency.
It's whipping up, because we're feeling safe. And when we feel safe, if I think about it from internal family systems, it's gently dismantling the protectors to allow the exiles to come forward.
Awesome. All right, Paula, what's the best way to get in contact with you? And then when's your next group happening? Give us some info on that.
Great. So contacting me through my website, which is www.paulascatolini.com. It's probably the easiest. I do also have a Paula Scatolini LLC Facebook following. And my groups start the end of July, beginning of August. I usually have a few cohorts going at the same time, so folks can pop on. There is an application that has to be filled out. Okay.
So exciting. I have to have you back.
Wonderful. I would love to come back.
Yeah, you got to come back. There's not enough time to talk about all this. So exciting. And yet intense. I love the way you framed everything by saying this is kind of a human, a shared human experience. And I think that's really so important to put out there. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. It's great seeing you again. Great having you on here.
Wonderful. It was lovely to see you as well.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.